Happy New Year. I have to just say I'm so pleased that so many folks are finding time to spend learning more about prevention. I know that it's already been a rough beginning of a year, and I'm just constantly reminded about all of the heroes and how so many of us have continued to just get up in the morning, get dressed, show up for other people, and working to make life safer and healthier and more joyful for everyone. So please, I just really want to appreciate all of you for being here. Thanks for continuing to be a part of the prevention conversation. I do want to let folks know we just recently posted our new training, our virtual classroom series that starts in late March. Check out our website for that information. In fact, some of the folks who were saying hi to just completed some of our training, so it's great to see you guys here. I'm Jenny Coleman. I'm the director here at Stop It Now. And with me is Micah Waxman, our training associate.
Hi, everyone.
Together, we're bringing you Dear Stop It Now, my adult child just disclosed they were sexually abused.
Behind the scenes today, we have Lily Lawrence, our wonderful administrator. She's going to be helping with all of our technical needs. We'll also be introducing our guest expert, Mel Langston, just a little bit later on. Everyone's going to stay muted throughout the webinar, but please do use chat to share any thoughts or comments that come up as we go through our webinar. Certainly, if there's time in the moment, we will respond as we can, but there are 15 full minutes set aside at the end to address any questions. A quick note on audio: if anyone is having problems or you just want to improve your audio, you can dial in by using the phone number provided. To do this, you can click on the button with the microphone on it. Generally, this is located at the bottom left of your screen, and press switch to phone audio, and then you can just follow the instructions from there. Finally, there will be a brief survey at the end. This is your chance to tell us what works and what we can improve on. And after the webinar, you should receive an email with a link to the webinar recording and to the survey again.
Great, thanks, Micah. So when we thought about what voice we wanted to bring to you this time from the conversations that we have in our helpline, we landed on this voice of the parent that has just found it out that their child, who is now an adult, was sexually abused when they were young. Last time we brought you our webinar focusing on the non-offending parent, and while certainly in many cases this may also be the case for parents calling us who just found out, who had found out their spouse had abused their child. This time we're talking really more specifically about the experience of not knowing your child was abused until that child tells you years later after it happened, when they're now an adult. We want to dig a little bit deeper on why disclosures like this aren't made until later, and discuss how parents react to this news, how it lands and what they need, and what we can do to help support them and for their own self-care and to deal with the explosion of information they've received, and what they can do to support their child and help them. We know we have a lot to learn from any and every story of abuse, and from all of those who are impacted by abuse, and certainly no more so from adults who've experienced child sexual abuse. From their parents, their family members, other loved ones, everybody impacted does have their experience helps us better understand and helps us better respond, and ultimately helps us better prevent child sex abuse. We can learn about what gets in the way of speaking up and asking for help. We can learn what we can do to strengthen our protective factors, and we can learn a lot about what we need to do to be accountable and for healing and for recovery.
So let's hear from our first letter writer, who says, Dear Stop It Now Helpline, my daughter is 22 and just told me a few years ago about abuse by my husband. I had absolutely no knowledge of this, that this was happening, and felt totally blindsided. I went into a depression that I'm just now coming out of. My husband has been ill for years and has also struggled with addiction. My daughter will not tell me any details of the abuse. We've always been extremely close, and this is really heartbreaking to me. Today I spoke with a lawyer. What's the best thing for me to do? I feel like I'll lose my relationship with my daughter if I don't leave him. So, wow, this is really just so much for this parent to be dealing with all at once. I imagine that this is really difficult for her right now, and she's juggling quite a lot. In fact, her question is really something that we hear often from parents in this situation. What do I do? So to help us answer this and our other letter writers, I want to introduce our guest, Mel Langston. I lost her in the fray, but Jenny, while I'm doing that, can you make sure that you unmute her as I introduce her, okay? Thanks.
I did that, and there she is.
Okay, great. So, the one thing I will say before I do this formal introduction is that unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources geared towards parents in this specific situation. So when we're speaking with folks on our helpline, one of the most frequent websites that we talk about is MOSAC for parents in this situation. And that's why we asked Mel Langston, who is MOSAC's founder, to be on our webinar today. So as a therapist, Mel has worked in the field of sexual abuse with families, offenders, and parents of sexually abused children for over 26 years. She is a licensed professional counselor in Oregon and works in mental health and substance addictions. In addition to being the founder of MOSAC, Mel has conducted parent custody evaluations, mental health, alcohol and drug, and criminal violence evaluations for individuals, courts, and attorneys. She's worked in dual diagnosis, trauma, addiction, and with many other populations experience psychiatric disorders. In addition to her master's degree in psychology and counseling, she also has a PhD in health psychology and behavioral medicine. Both her master's thesis and PhD dissertation focused on research conducted with mothers of sexually abused children, and her thesis research was on sex abuse intervention programs, studying treatment effects for mothers of sexually abused children. Mel also has a personal connection to this issue, which we'll let her share. So welcome, Mel. We are so glad to have you join us here today.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share and just to be here. And you wanted to know a little bit about MOSAC, and you already said quite a bit about me, and that there was a personal association to it. And lots of times the traumas we experience or some of the very negative events in our lives provide the motivation for what we do next, and sometimes provide an entire career projection of what we're going to do for the rest of our lives. And that's what happened in my life from the time that I discovered that I had children that were sexually abused. I wanted to do something to help other mothers, because at the point that the disclosure came to me, I knew nothing about sexual abuse. I wasn't sexually abused. I had no family, no friends who had been sexually abused, and there were no resources at that time. It was before the time that it was on TV and it was in movies. It was before that period of time. And so my first thing that I remember saying to a friend of mine when I discovered the abuse, or it was disclosed by my daughter, was give me a book, give me something, give me some resource that I can find out what to do next. What do I do next? And that was really what provided the motivation for putting together the MOSAC website. I was in my PhD program, and I had the opportunity for an independent project, and I had an excellent resource there in one of the professors who had a PhD in computer science as well as in psychology. And so he was my he assisted me in this process of putting together an over 350 page website that I wanted to be as comprehensive as possible, because I had no information. I knew that other mothers out there had no information about what to do and what that process was going to look like. So I really tried to put it together from the beginning of what is sexual abuse to what are the effects and consequences, and how do you know, and why don't children tell, and what's the court process, and really going through everything that the questions a mother might ask. Also had put together a Twitter account that was 10 years ago, 11 years ago now, on the website, and 10 years ago, the Twitter account and the Facebook account. And so and now have a chat page for moms. So very much continue to be involved in how to provide resources and support to moms, as well as to be an advocate for children through the work that I do with courts and with GHS and with individual clients and speaking. So trying to provide more information out there so that people understand what happens when a child is sexually abused, and really how prevalent it is and how horrific the consequences of it are. Because I'm a therapist, I see a lot of abuse and trauma. That's really a specialization in PTSD in my private practice. And so many have experienced sexual abuse. And I often quote the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that one out of four girls and 1 out of 6 boys in the United States is sexually abused before the age of 18. And that information's been out since 1998, something like that. And people still don't believe it. And they still don't believe that sexual abuse is as prominent and as prevalent as it is, and that you just don't see it and you don't know it. You'd assume everybody is who they look like they are.
Yeah.
That tells you a little bit about me. I don't know if you have any other questions about me, and MOSAC and what the purpose of MOSAC is. So
I think I have just one quick follow-up question. Is your website also appropriate for fathers of sexually abused children?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. I have a little disclaimer at the beginning, on the website that says, I purposefully pointed to mothers because they're the, research has shown for like a couple of decades or so that mothers are really, the belief of the mother is such a primary and important factor in the child's recovery. If the mother believes, understands and believes and can support and protect the child, the highest percentage, obviously, of sexual abuse is perpetrated by men, but not all. And such a huge percentage is perpetrated by family members. I think in my dissertation research, it was something like 79% of all the sexual abuse that had been perpetrated by people that were in the survey, and it was several hundred people that had participated in that, were family members, and better than 50% were father figures, biological step, foster fathers, and then brothers, grandfathers, and such. So I really targeted at mothers, but of course the information is vital for fathers to have as well if they have a child that's been sexually abused.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I guess my next question for you is, so we heard from this first parent. Is this kind of, this recent discovery that their adult child, was sexually abused when they were younger, and they really had no idea. Is this something that you frequently hear about, with the folks you work with, or the folks who contact you through the website?
Absolutely. I hear from these kinds of stories all the time in my office as well as on the website. What was really notable to me from that particular letter was a few years ago. That meant that this mother had known and had maintained, really it was with the offender, was the mother, the daughter, it was just, it was a query for me. I would have had lots of questions on, how long ago did you find out, and what did you do immediately, and how did your daughter feel about it prior to now? So that could have been interpreted as a double betrayal by the child. So I don't know. I read that story and I just sort of thought, okay, she didn't need any more details, but the focus was really on the mother, and I didn't know anything at all about how the victim was managing at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the interesting pieces that we often hear on our helpline. We get this little tiny snippet of what's going on in the life, and we don't have like all the other questions that we love to know about. Like, did this parent immediately shut down and now 3 years later they're kind of picking this up again? What did they say to their child? How is the child doing now? So yeah, I appreciate that. That is absolutely a question that we have too.
Micah, if I could interject, just because there's some things going on in the chat. And first of all, Mel, one question is just wondering if you're based in Oregon.
Well, I'm in Oregon, yes.
But the website lives not, it's not connected to a service. The website itself is the service.
Right, the website is to provide, the purpose of the website is to provide information, resources, and support. I am all that's entailed in that, and that's why I also have the Facebook and Twitter, and there's a chat page on the website.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am me.
You are MOSAC.
I am MOSAC. And
that's right. And someone did say, you know, just to share that you have great information. Thanks for creating it. We have a couple of comments I'm going to get to in a second, but I also want to say hi to Rona's Rose that yes, you'll see, she also has some supports available. We have included MOASIS support with our resources later, so you'll all see that as well. And actually, this is probably a good segue because we had a comment as you were talking from someone who wanted to note that we too often fail to distinguish between children who are sexually abused and have the support of their parents. They are believed, not blamed, etc. And kids whose home situations do not make it safe for them to tell and who may also be abused repeatedly over a long period. You know, and so that's kind of a great segue into this next section that we wanted to talk a little bit about, I think. Don't you, Micah?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, to really start to contextualize just how often children don't speak up, I want to share just a quick statistic with you all. The Department of Justice suggests that 86% of child sexual abuse actually goes unreported altogether. When children who have been sexually abused do report, a high percentage of them actually delay disclosure well into adulthood. So that means that most people who are sexually abused children wait for many, many years, often until they're adults, to actually speak up and tell someone. So Mel, this is, you know, probably one of the most frequent questions you hear. I know it is one that we hear on our helpline. Parents really want to know, you know, like why didn't I know sooner? Why did my child wait until they were an adult to talk to me about this? So kind of beyond the research, what would you say to someone who's wondering why adults wait to disclose sexual abuse to their parents until adulthood?
Wow, that's a very complex question and would have a very lengthy answer. I will try to be as concise as possible. One, children don't have any idea how to tell. Often they have no one to tell. So there's a how to tell, what to say. Lots of times they don't have the language. When we think about such a percentage of children, especially in my research, that were sexually abused between 0 and 3, and then such a high percentage, you know, between 3 and 7, where children don't have the language, they don't know how to tell. They often don't have a safe person to tell, which was sort of alluded to in that question. They could be in a home that has a lot of other unsafe characteristics, you know, that substance abuse and domestic violence. There could be other safety issues there. And unsafe parents, that's part of it. There's so many reasons children don't tell. They don't know what to say and they don't know how to say it. They don't have the words, but then they're so afraid. So, you know, I had this list of all of the things, you know, but, mainly it's fear. There's so many fears. Fear of not being believed would be at the top. What the offender says to them and how they've been threatened and being told that they wouldn't believe, or being told that they're like their mother already knew. How close, who the betrayer was, who the family, if it was a family member, it's much more likely to have been delayed. The bond between the child and the betrayer or the abuser is a big factor. The severity of abuse, you know, the PTSD symptoms, the level of dissociation the child's experienced because of the trauma, just so many factors contribute to that child not speaking up. You know, there's so much ambivalence in whether or not to speak up or not. I see on the screen some of the things I'm saying: the scared, ashamed, guilty, feeling threatened, don't even know it's abuse because the abuse has been normalized. It's normative for them. They've been told or they assume that this happens to everybody, okay? Or they've been told by the abuser, this is completely normal and this is what happens. And then they, sometimes they will like say something and think that, you know, they're sort of like telling somebody, they'll let like a hint out, but they pay attention to what the response is because it's so important for a child to be believed. That's just like number one. The child needs to be believed when the child speaks up. And that's such a huge problem. I work with courts. So that's such a huge problem with, you know, like our justice system as far as believing a child, because the first thing is, well, the child might be making it up. The child might be in a fantasy. Somebody might have told this child to tell this. And really the vast majority, the vast majority, we're talking about, you know, way down to 1%, 2% of children who ever would lie, who ever would say anything about this, because they give, it's embarrassing, it's hurtful, it breaks up families. And these are the things that the child's afraid of. What's going to happen? What's a fallout from actually talking about this to somebody, not just being believed then, but what's going to happen to them? What's going to happen to their family? What's going to happen to the abuser if they happen to be close to the abuser? So there are just so many reasons that a child doesn't tell, and so many reasons why as an adult they decide to tell, but as an adult they're still sort of telling from their child's self. So some of the same things that when they are adults then they're disclosing go along with when they were a child if they were disclosing. In other words, mothers need to respond in the same way.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that too, because I think that that's why we're talking about this in particular, is because the reasons why, you know, children don't disclose is directly related to why is an adult telling now. You know, kids may feel manipulated or tricked, as, you know, we've heard so many stories about, you know, someone had manipulated them to take photos and now it feels like they willingly did this, they're responsible. How could they be so stupid or gullible? I should have said no, I should have resisted somehow. You hit on all the important parts. And really just to kind of add on to that, yeah, you know, they of course have relationships with the people who are harming them. Just to think about the realm of gender as well. Men, when looking at research, men delay telling and discussing about the abuse oftentimes 20, 30 plus years after it happened. If the person who was sexually abused had a penis, would anyone believe that they didn't want it if they were raped and they responded sexually? If the abuser was a woman, would anyone believe them if they told? It could also be that, you know, a person feels deeply shameful. You know, they feel like the abuse was somehow reflective of their masculinity, their orientation, their identity, their self-worth. And yeah, what we also know is that research shows that when children do disclose, a large percentage of that is actually towards peers instead. It's not to parents or authority figures. That figure it's typically only between 6 and 15%. So a very, very small percentage of abuse is discovered and disclosed to, you know, legal authorities or parents. So I appreciate all you have kind of said about that.
Yeah, and I won't share all of the chat, but I will say the chat is quite active as folks are really sharing personal experiences, identifying with what you're both talking about, the barriers of disclosure for children, and also parents' responses in the moment. So I'm actually going to move us on because I think some of this is going to keep unfolding, and we can talk a little bit even more about some of the believability of it. I want to just share this letter to help us kind of start talking about parents' reactions then to when they hear this as their child is an adult now. This person wrote into us about their 27-year-old daughter who had just shared with her that her stepfather, my husband of 20 years from a very happy marriage, was sexual with her while in middle school. I'm shocked and devastated and confused. My daughter has no real motive to make this up, yet I have a terrible time believing, yet alone accepting. How sure can we be? I don't want to rip our lives apart without being sure that this has happened. And so really, this is exactly what you were talking about. First, the most important thing for children to be believed. But while we know the system can be questioning, we certainly have heard folks responding to, how come my parents didn't believe me? Or we have somebody who wrote in, for example, that my daughter was abused by an uncle, my sister, her aunt was aware of the abuse but didn't leave immediately. My daughter says she's more traumatized by my sister not protecting her than the actual abuse. Mm-hmm. So I guess first I would really, just ask, while it may be kind of a natural response to, no, this can't be true. No way is this happening. And particularly when we're thinking about the relationship of the parent to the adult who has abused the child, there's still this part of us that says, how can a parent not believe? So where does that knee-jerk reaction come from in that moment of, this couldn't be true? No, I've known this person my whole life. Could my daughter, my son be lying? Could they be making this up? What can you talk a little bit more about that reaction, Mel?
Yes. Well, again, very complex question. There's a normative level of ambivalence that's going to occur the moment somebody says something. A child says that to a parent. Adult child says to parent, okay, this happened to me when I was a child. I never told. And immediately the parent could be defensive, could be in denial, a lot of denial. All of this would come up. Now I give instructions on how not to ever verbalize that to the child, but because you've got to sit in a calm place with a small child or an adult child and ask, okay, basic questions like who and what happened and when did this happen? But you can't express to the child unbelief. You can't express to the child doubts. You can't express to the child any kind of other motivation. You can't express to the child really your emotional reaction, because even an adult child is really speaking out of a younger child, okay, who is extremely hurt by what happened to them and have held it in all this time. And really a mother, if it's a mother that's sitting there listening to an adult child, needs to look at that adult child through the lens of seeing that adult child as a child and responding with the same calmness and responding with the same love and responding with the same support and caring and not thinking about herself. This is a huge thing. I know about it because I've been talking about it for so long, but I also remember, and because we didn't mention it before, it comes with factors of belief. Okay. So a mother might hear this and think, oh, wow. Yeah. Well, that makes sense, because he was, doing other kinds of things that were sexually wrong, what we would call deviant behaviors. And that in my personal life, that was what happened when I got a call and I asked, can this be true by someone at a school? I said, yes. And anybody else would say, how in the world could you say yes that quick? Well, I could say yes that quick because the father was into pornography and was a sex addict. And I knew about prior sexual kinds of behaviors that were offline. Okay. So I didn't know anything about sexual abuse, but it was like, okay, I believe it. And I never had a doubt that it was true. But then others think that they're in happy marriages. They think that they have wonderful husbands and they're wonderful fathers, and they can't imagine this could happen. But children, I just say children don't lie and offenders lie. That's just the way I put it. Children, a victim almost never lies about it. The abuser almost always does lie about it. So in a family situation, the person who's supposed to be doing the believing might go to the other person and ask, well, is this really true? Not a good idea, but is this really true? Because obviously there's going to be a lie response, because there's such huge consequences behind, you know, this disclosure. But then that's not the responsibility of the mother with adult child. So that's mingling something else into it. But it is just complex. And so I'm looking at the screen, believability and betrayal. My child must be misremembering or confused. Never say anything like that. And if you have that thought, recognize that you're still in denial. When people are in denial, I often say something to the, you know, like if somebody comes to your door and says something, a police officer comes to your door and says, you know, your husband was just killed in an automobile accident. That would sort of compare to this, okay? Like an atomic bomb just exploded in front of you in your life. So, and you'll say, no, that can't be. I just got off the phone with him. Instant denial, right? You wouldn't believe that that could possibly be true. That's normal in any grief response. And we recognize that this is a grief, and it will be an ongoing grief in the mother's life for the rest of her life. There's a piece of it that's an ongoing grief, and that's something that you just carry with you. So this can't be true. My sister was such a loving aunt. Why would my child lie about this? So there's an assumption there. I'm looking at the screen that she would lie. I feel so betrayed. I trusted him. So there is that betrayal. If it is a partner, if it is your husband, it's a partner, or if it's your father, or it's your uncle, you know, whoever it is, it's a betrayal. It's a huge betrayal for the mother, as well as a betrayal for the child. And of course, the mother's going to have strong, strong feelings, anger and guilt. I didn't know, shame, all of those feelings that mothers experience. But that has to be secondary to the child that's in front of you at the point of disclosure, adult or young, secondary to your own feelings, or secondary to how do I respond here? Because if you respond inappropriately, in other words, you start asking questions and show doubts or anything, the child will shut down. As a little child will simply recant and go back to, oh it wasn't true, I made it up, you know, happens all the time. But then the abuse goes on. Or if it's an adult child, you could sever your relationship with that adult child by not believing that adult child and supporting that adult child. So I'm not sure how much more you want me to add to what I just responded to.
No, that's good. But you did, it's funny. I just thought of something that we hadn't talked about, and I'm wondering what you think of this. I wonder if there isn't also an aha moment for some parents that, you know, besides the warning signs, but we also know that many of the adults, and we're going to come back and revisit this in a little bit, but some of these young adults then have had some tough times. You know, there was drug and alcohol involvement. There may have been some relationships that were risky and even violent. There may have been just struggles in school and finding a job and making friends, of just, you know, where to connect, and, you know, beyond the normal teenage years. And I wonder if some parents, when that disclosure does come, and I almost said finally, and I caught myself because I don't think that's the right word, because it's on the survivor's terms, of course, when they want to disclose. But I wonder if there isn't that moment beyond the denial piece that's oh my gosh, this whole time, this is what you've been struggling with.
Yeah.
Which, you know, so I mean, I'm just going to shift this slide to just some of the other reactions, because in addition to what we've been talking about, that disbelief and betrayal and just that momentary, what my life just blew up, and those immediate reactions, then there's a level, I imagine, of what is the world going to think about me? How could I not have known? How could I not have protected this child? What do I even do next? And how do I find therapy? Do I call the police? I mean, there just must be such immense confusion in some ways of such multi-layered responses.
I would like to throw in here something that I call a lens, how we look at this situation, and because it fits with what you're saying. And then I'm going to comment on what you just said. When a child, we have warning signs and we're suspicious, that's one thing. But lots of times we know nothing. We have no clue. And then all of a sudden it comes out of the, like blindsided, that one letter, I was blindsided, I had no clue. That's because when a child does have behaviors that are problematic, we look at those behaviors through a normal lens, like it's a familiar, so we try to associate it with previous things that have happened and what we understand. We don't put it in the sexual abuse lens, we just put it in a normative lens. And then when we have a disclosure from an adult, we need to have a lens that looks at that adult child as a younger child. We need to actually have a lens on. And then the third thing, a lens, is from then on, we really need to look at that adult child through a trauma lens and see behaviors that occurred before, like you're talking to or you're alluding to, as well as her reactions, his or her reactions right now. Because anger, the longer that it is before that disclosure takes place, the more angry and the more resentment and the more blame that the adult child can place on the mother. And then when the disclosure occurs, the more stress, the more guilt, it's much increased over when it's a young child, because now you have this time. And like you said, as a teenager, the child might have been, engaging in substance abuse, might have been cutting, might have been, had an eating disorder, all of these things that I see as, signs of, if someone comes to me and they're like, 13, 14 years old, and they've got all of that, they've got an eating disorder and they're cutting and they're suicidal and they're very, very depressed and they're starting to use substances, I know trauma has occurred in their past. And very often that is sexual abuse that has occurred in their past, but that's been unaddressed. They haven't talked about it. They haven't disclosed it. And so what you said is absolutely true, Jenny, that that aha moment could occur if you've like sort of worked with your child through many, many, many problem areas that your child's having, but you were clueless at where that child came to this place that they are struggling so badly with all of these things. You can think, well, I thought I was a pretty good parent, but look, I must not have been, because, and that's sort of what I'm so ashamed I really failed my child, because that one common reaction, but you didn't know. So there could be an aha, oh, now it makes sense. I don't know how often I see that, but it does make sense that a mother would have that kind of an aha moment, having gone through that.
Yeah, I imagine. Like almost everything that has to do with sexual abuse, so much of what any individual is dealing with and processing, it ends up being in isolation, because it's so difficult to much less think about this, as opposed to reach out and talk about, oh my gosh, here's what I'm going through, what I'm worrying about. And we know that's part of why we do these webinars, because it's so important that we understand these voices. As we're seeing in our chat, people are really identifying with some of the experiences that's being described. And it's as I said, our last seminar where we talked about someone I love sexually abused a child, we did talk a lot too about that reaction of the non-offending parent, and also how society can view that person who really may have had, there were limited warning signs. They're just things, people are really good at hiding what they're doing. That's sometimes why this happens, right? Because it is really easy for us to not see abuse because we don't want to believe it. It's really easy to just find a quick excuse for behavior that's natural. That's with no blame. We all do that. But when we find out later that something's happened, we look to blame a lot. It's just a way that we cope. I think there's a lot of ways that we end up looking to cope.
Yeah, that's so important, I think, to mention here. And just to kind of move us on a little bit, I want to share just another quick question from a parent who says, my adult daughter just disclosed that a former girlfriend of her father's molested her at the age of 6 numerous times. My daughter struggled with alcohol abuse and left law school after taking a big nosedive. I'm not sure if she's ready to press charges, but this woman needs to pay for what she's done to my child. I need concrete action steps, please. So Mel, I'm wondering what you would say to, you know, a parent who might be looking to kind of just engage with the justice system. Maybe they're looking to press charges or to report as a way of responding. Is this a step that helps with healing?
This isn't the mother's place. When you have a young child that discloses abuse, it's your responsibility to protect your child, and that will require immediate reporting and immediate removal of any abuser, immediate response to protection of your child. When it's an adult child, you don't have any responsibility to assume legal action. That's the child's, you know, if the child's coming, that adult child's coming to you to disclose, and that's her autonomy, that's her right to decide whether she wants to do anything or not. You know, and of course there are things like, it might even still be within that period of time when she could charge a criminal charge. However, that's still her voice, her right to be able to do that. It has nothing to do with a mother's responsibility. So I say the same thing and would continue to say the same thing to mothers of adult children who disclose that I say to mothers of younger children on the first two things. One, believe your child. Two, support your child in every way you can with love and care and being there and listening and being present. But you no longer are in that protection of your child the way when your child was younger. It's your child that gets to make those decisions. If your child comes to you and says, hey, mom, I'm not sure what I can do here. You know, can I go ahead and file criminal charges? Can I file a civil suit against him or her, whatever? Then you're given permission to enter into a conversation with your adult child in this situation about possible recourse that your child could have on the legal side. But otherwise, concrete action steps are not for the mother. The only concrete action steps I would give a mother is be present, be available. Your child's been traumatized, learn all you can about sexual abuse, deal with your own issues of feeling guilty or ashamed and all of that. See a therapist, go to a therapist, okay? And address your own internal conflicts around this and your anger about it, and you're wanting to get, you know, some kind of justice about it for your child, and then allow your child to make the decisions that your child has the right to make on his or her own. Is that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And I think it really helps to answer this question because ultimately, you know, these concrete action steps for this parent is going to be to support their child and what the child wants. We get a lot of folks writing into the helpline who, you know, their one way of potentially feeling like they can take back some control, it feels like, you know, doing that is by reporting, is by bringing legal charges or civil charges involving the justice system, because, you know, their life may feel so out of control. That's their one way to really grasp at, you know, what do I do now? But ultimately their responsibility is to, yeah, like you said, really support their child, figure out what exactly they want to do. And Jenny, could you just move us to the next slide, please? As we continue to talk about this, you know, you've already mentioned some of these great things. You know, does this person want to report? If they do, great. You know, you can find out, you know, folks are saying in the chat, what are the statute of limitations? I know that a lot of the laws are now being expanded to really reflect the fact that, yeah, children don't disclose when they're kids. So now statute of limitations are expanded to allow for adults to come forward and take concrete action steps within the legal system if that's something that they want to do. It may be that they're not ready for that step. It maybe not for a few years, maybe not till therapy, maybe never, and that's okay. You know, and there are even other steps that folks can take if they are really not looking to see the person who harmed or abused them put through the legal system. There are other options out there like restorative justice, like transformative justice approaches. But basically the survivor, the person who is sexually abused, they need to figure out what they want and do that on their own timeline. I know that someone also said, you know, hey, what if there is a child who might currently be at risk? You know, maybe the person who sexually abused their child who's now an adult, maybe they work with children, they're a teacher, they have other children in the home who it feels like they may be a risk to harm them. And I certainly agree, this is a really difficult, complicated situation. Here in the US, you absolutely can contact Child Protective Services anonymously, ask them if the situation is reportable. So that can be another way to kind of figure out what next steps can be taken. But again, I really want to bring it back down to, we also want to support a survivor's own agency around telling their story. I think, you know, the other thing is if someone does want to press charges, you know, help them be an advocate, see what you can do for them. Do they need to get some sort of legal support involved, like a lawyer? Can you help find out not only what some of the statute of limitations laws are, but what to expect when reporting to the criminal justice system? Just knowing a little bit about what that process is going to look like, offering to be there, to be an advocate or an ally there, and to kind of step in if, you know, if need be, to kind of look out for this person. It can be really meaningful as well. Mel, was there anything else that you wanted to add that it feels like we left out here?
On the question of that one slide?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that you pretty well covered what I hadn't said. You know, we can, if we can do some as mothers or parents, we can do some exploration of what the options are, but it still comes back to it's the adult child's initiative to do what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'd like to chime in just because there's a lot happening in the chat, so I'm trying to follow along with that as well. And I think it is hard for folks to hear that it could be very difficult for a parent to respond legally to the disclosure that their child has made that something happened when they were a child. Mostly that's because legally, it really doesn't make sense to do that we can't report a crime that happened to someone else when that person is an adult. But we really understand and respect that for many parents, yes, wanting to report, wanting to call the police, wanting to call whatever other organization, licensing organizations, et cetera, that makes sense, is something they want to do. But what we want to really understand, and I don't mean to repeat what Mel or Mike has said, but really paramount for a survivor's healing, and I know there's been talk about looking at restorative justice principles in the chat as well, we really know that adults who've experienced child sexual abuse, that their healing process is more successful when they get to lead the process. Right. I love how somebody set up here that they got to hold space for their adult child. I thought, Mel, you would appreciate that. There's some great suggestions about supporting your child through paying for counseling or helping them find the resources. Yes. There are so many ways that we can effectively support our adult children who have been abused, and at the same time recognize that we're not going to make it go away by getting the person incarcerated. That may be what we want reasonably. It may even be something that should happen in terms of holding accountable space. And it's much more complicated in that as well, than just when we overstep the survivor's wishes about what they want to do. Now, the other thing that's come up in questions has been, well, what about if somebody discloses that somebody has been abusive and is now an active community member and perhaps could still be involved with children and still be putting children at risk? Mm-hmm. And, you know, we get this question on our helpline sometimes, and I have to say it is a complicated question. We want to be careful because there could be some legal concerns in terms of when we make allegations about someone, we want to make sure that we have certain facts. But what we know is, more importantly, is that we want to have successful conversations that help address the risks in whatever environment. So if we know that somebody in a community has, somebody has disclosed that that person has abused them, I think we need to have ongoing conversations about what are our next steps. It's possible that there has already been reports made about this person. It's possible that there has already been other parents who have raised concerns. So one thing people can always do is talk to each other and just, without making, pointing fingers, find out, has anybody ever had any concerns? Do we know what this community organization is doing to protect the children? Do we know how this community organization is doing background checks and what kind of training do they give? And so we're giving organizations the tools so that they can identify behaviors in their organization that may be putting children at risk. Now, I'm really hesitant to say, should I then go to the principal of a school or to the, the church administrator and say, my daughter just told me now that 20 years ago or 10 years ago, she was abused here by X, Y, and Z. I think that that's where we get really sticky because we want to protect children from future abuse. And it's very possible that that may not end up in a way that's protective. And so please don't make those decisions in isolation. Work with your child. Think about working with their therapist, your own therapist. You may even want to talk to your own lawyer about it. And I don't mean to multi-layer it even more, but I just want to caution folks that the way we approach conversations can determine how preventive our actions really end up being. I hope that was clear. I think it's really complicated to try to answer quickly. And again, just following some of the commentary on the chat, I said it's bringing up a lot of concerns and questions for folks. That said, looking at the time, I want to move us on. These are great conversations, even if they're hard. We know they're important. We also know it's important, even if we don't all agree, that we still have room to make sure our voices are heard. So the next question we did want to talk about is about that concern for the adult child who isn't seeking help, right? Who maybe has had issues with drug and alcohol, or seems to be choosing folks that continue violence in their life. And we've already addressed that to some degree. And our letter, we just found out a week ago, my son, who's 18, was sexually abused by his oldest brother growing up. My oldest child, he's having memories that are haunting him. He still will not see a counselor. He refuses to come to family events and is very depressed and suicidal. I think he blames me that I should have known. How can I help him? So I know that we've talked, a lot about this already, Mel, but I'm just wondering what else we can say when we're particularly watching our adult child go down a really dark path. What else besides holding that space so important, offering to find a therapist, reaching out to say, I'm here, I believe you. At what point, as we watch a child really self-destruct, what can we do? Okay, so that story, again, the story itself, you only have pieces of the story, like I said before, but it's problematic. Okay, so the older brother, this is sibling abuse. So, and this is a family, and this is a mom writing in, but so was the brother reported? Is the brother not allowed to be around? Is there a separation? Is this, even if it's an adult child that's 18 years old, is he protected from that other brother? In other words, are the parents of the teenager, this 18-year-old who is an adult, and they can't, it shifts there in their responsibility and their ability to access support or protection for him. Have they adequately dealt with it as a family?
in other words? And have they adequately dealt with it from a legal perspective? And have they, and is that the kind of conversations that we're having? Because when the question comes up with, he doesn't want to hang out with the family, and it's his older brother that did it, are the parents expecting? Because I know I talk to families and they expect, you know, hey, you know, your brother said he was sorry. And so they still have Thanksgiving and Christmas together. And of course, the victim is going to feel betrayed by the parents, besides being betrayed by the sibling who abused him, who is struggling with all of this, who is now acting out, and the parents aren't able, in this case, to reach out and do anything about it. So I would still go back to have so it's that believe my son, okay, he's 18, support him in any way I can, and offer whatever things I could offer to him. But at 18, you know, they can live on their own. It's very different. You know, you can't report it to CPS, and protect. And the protection then comes into within the family unit. Have there been family discussions? Are there other siblings in the family? Lots of questions, you know. Was this older brother abused?
Yes.
And was this younger brother, 18, the only other child in the home? Or was there another child in the home who could have been abused by this older brother? There's these questions, you know, because incestuous family systems tend to be multi-incestuous, if that makes sense as a term, okay? And lots of times that is not the way it's viewed from a professional or from an agency or a court perspective. They'll say, this one child they might believe was abused, and other children might be questioned and deny it happened. But that's what kids do. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to disclose it. And in family systems, they also have all these reasons why they don't want to talk about it. So I have more questions about that scenario than I do answers about where to go forward with that scenario, except for the parents supporting that child and protecting that child in whatever way is possible. They can't force an 18-year-old into therapy. They can't force an 18-year-old to stop drinking or doing anything else. They can offer love, care, concern, compassion, availability, financial help, if that means they can go to therapy, or if they need inpatient care. They can offer support in all of those very tangible and intangible ways. But the protection part is very important as far as familial protection within that family unit. How much protection have the parents offered that child?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I would both agree as therapists that regardless of whether there was abuse in this child's life or whatever it is, that for any parent watching their child go through any sort of psychiatric crisis, through any trauma, you know, whenever, it's hard because we don't have that control. You're right. We cannot make an 18-year-old go to therapy. And for that, you know, I think any of us who has worried about someone that we love in our life, you know, how do we practice self-care while we still love someone and know that we can't help make them well? You know, we're getting really close to the end, which is good because you've been so thorough and so generous with sharing your information. You know, we really have covered most of talking about the survivor's experience. And we had just wanted to land very quickly on how to help if there is yet one more separate response to the adult child who says, and I'm not going to any family gatherings. I don't want to see anyone. I'm going to separate from the family. And you know, certainly we've talked a lot about understanding the survivor's feelings, really what they need and what they, you know, how we can show up. But is there any other kind of final thoughts for the parent who is seeing their family then literally torn apart?
I would say expect it and accept it, and continue loving and supporting your children. You don't have other options, because if you fight it, you more quickly disintegrate relationships. You've got to be present, loving, caring, compassionate, and understand. I work with a lot of families. Sometimes children haven't had anything to do with the parents at all for a long time. I mean, they just like no family contact, no parental, because they feel so betrayed. Sometimes they're involved, but they set boundaries on what kind of relationship they want with their families. And we need to be able to accept that. If we understand sexual abuse and the horror of it, and the consequences of it to the child, or, to the child and the adult now who has experienced sexual abuse as a child, if we can understand that, be present with that, sit with that, work, take care of ourselves, go to therapy, and be able to expect the fallout that happens, and then accept it and do what we can to foster a positive relationship and rebuild the broken bridges in our relationships to our adult children who have been abused as children. Because like I said before, the longer that period of time goes, the more anger and resentment and blame that is thrown at the mother in those situations. The how did she know, and everything looks normal, and especially if she's still with the abuser, it compounds it. I hope that answered that question.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I see some chats that are supporting that too. And again, about building bridges, about not being imprisoned by others' dysfunction. So we have talked a lot about how to help parents and their response directly to their child. I'm wondering, is there anything particular, though, for those who are in our audience who may be working as you have directly with those parents, that they need for themselves? What kind of healing specifically, and maybe there's not a specific answer, but what can we say to that mom or that dad? Because there's got to be space that we hold the pain of those people, sometimes separate from the experience of their child. Their fury at their child. Rational or not, we know that humans have just shoot off, that just so many things are triggered, or we're touched by so much, and we have reactions we don't always understand. And if somebody that I was working with in clinical practice said, oh my gosh, my daughter told me this, and they're doing everything right in terms, being the relevant, but they're doing everything as they best can to meet their kids' needs, what can they also do for themselves?
Experience their own emotions and be able to do that with a therapist. Anger would be probably at the top of my list of what's going on inside that mom. Anger at the abuser, anger at herself, sometimes anger at the victim, anger at God, just anger. And this had come to my mind a few minutes ago, and I didn't know whether I was going to include it, but anger. I mean, when I first started working in a sex abuse intervention clinic way back in the early 90s, I remember someone in my mom's group, because I had a mom's group for non-offending spouses. And I saw a lot of anger, but she actually, had a lot of them want to kill their spouses, kill the person who did it, anger, rage. And sometimes that's not talked about very much. The level of anger and rage you can have at this person that did this to your child. Once you come to that real belief, this happened. And she was telling me, this is so long ago, she was telling me that she had actually gotten a gun and gone to where he worked and was watching him at work. She did not do it.
Wow.
I'm really glad. She wouldn't have been sitting in the group at the point that she was, but that's a common reaction. The anger and the rage that the mother feels at the betrayal and the pain and suffering that her child has experienced. And then the grief, that whole grief process, working through the grief, working through the betrayals, working through the dissociation as a result of the trauma, so that that mom is in reality about what happened in the past, about what's happening right now, and what to see is in the future, but to be able to be very present and to address any betrayal bonds. Because if it's a member of her family that has perpetrated this abuse on her child, then she's going to need to work to disentangle that and be able to figure that out. And that's the hardest thing. I work a lot with domestic violence victims, and it's a similar kind of dynamic. It's like, no matter what this person has done to you, you still are somehow attached to them and you just can't let go. So those betrayal bonds are present in both the child who's been abused and in the mom of the child that's been abused. So I had made a quick little thing, putting down like treatment challenges for mothers and the kinds of things that professionals need to know, like normal grief, PTSD symptoms, the guilt and the shame and the self-blame are all things that need to be explored, processed, and worked on. Support, making sure there's adequate family and social support, whether there's any mental health problems or addiction problems, how well they're coping, healthy, unhealthy coping, whether there's, any kind of learned helplessness that's associated with prior domestic violence or their own prior sexual abuse, how that mixes in. So that's a big issue for moms who've been sexually abused. If their child is sexually abused, there's a compounding of the guilt and the shame because they wanted to make sure it never happened to their child. So now they feel really guilty about the fact that it did happen to their child. So this is a whole different issue. Then there's codependence, there's financial problems. There's just so much that can be addressed directly in therapy with that mom. And it's because it's something that hits a mom in a comprehensive way, every area of her life, in the same way that it hits the child. It's sexual abuse is comprehensive. It affects brains, it affects emotions, it affects bodies. Somatic symptoms is something I haven't mentioned, but I want to make sure I throw this in because that was what my dissertation was on. My dissertation was stress effects on physical health of mothers, because this is a less obvious, less addressed issue that dissociation and PTSD related to trauma causes somatic effects and much, much higher percentage of illness because the immune system is reduced function. And this is very important for therapists and professionals working with moms to be aware of their physical health, the mom's physical health, and making sure that they're doing the things that they need to do to take care of themselves and recognizing they have a risk of illness. Just to throw in one more simple thing, that was that MOSAC, that sort of, this is the reason why my dissertation was what it was, because I was a very healthy mom. I was a very healthy young woman. I was in my early 30s and my appendix ruptured. I got pneumonia. I had multiple surgeries. I nearly died with the appendix rupture. I was in the hospital for weeks. I had multiple gallbladder removed. I mean, all of a sudden, within a year after the disclosure, my body fell apart. And it was like, what was that? And then I realized, as I went to grad school and realized that, well, with all the somatic symptoms that the victim experiences, and if we are aware that those are part of those warning signs that abuse is occurring, stomach aches and headaches and all the physiological manifestations of the abuse the child is experiencing, moms experience some things in a very similar way. It's a somatic effect. So I want to make sure I mentioned that. So that's something else that therapists and professionals need to be aware of.
That makes sense. I'm glad you did include that. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of put some final thoughts here on healing, and I really do appreciate you kind of mentioning just the somatic issues. I was reading something just today about depression and how little it's talked about, just how we separate mind and body as two separate things, and really we need to be looking at things more holistically. When someone is experiencing a trauma or experiencing mental health, there are also things going on in their body's processing this as well. So definitely that's something that, you know, parents and professionals and people who care about these folks should know too. And places they can get support. So, you know, this is by no means like a comprehensive list of all the resources that are out there. And the last resource there up on your screen is something that we just kind of came across recently. So it's not fully vetted, but yeah, this is just kind of the wrap up of, you know, everything that you had been saying earlier, is to really, you know, find support for themselves. And I don't know if there was anything else that maybe we didn't touch upon that we need to add before we move on to questions, or should we just go ahead and open up the floor for some of the questions, Jenny?
We can open up questions, definitely. I was just noting that a couple of other resources are in people's chats. Unique Foundation yes, I am aware of Unique Foundation as well, run has great resources for supporters. We're not aware of incestaware.org, so folks are welcome to check that out. We've had a recommendation about epigenetic. Thank you so much. Trauma. Gabor Mate, or Gabor Mate. I don't know if it's Gabor or Gabor, so probably Gabor. So just check out the chat if you can. We actually don't just have about 5 minutes. So please go ahead and chat in any questions. But I am really aware that there's been, you know, some intense conversations in the chat about everything from Stop It Now's mission and our commitment that everyone should be aware of help that's available in order to prevent child sexual abuse. We certainly know that that isn't a place that everybody can land when we're talking about people who may be at risk of abusing. And we honor that and completely understand that that's not a position that's comfortable for everyone. But we really, really appreciate everybody coming to the table for the conversation and being able to share not only their very personal experiences, but what they know from their professional practice, what they know from their just observations of both their personal and professional connections, because sexual abuse has pretty much touched all of us. We know that from the statistics that if, you know, we look around any room, chances are we're in a room with somebody who has been impacted by this. It is a sensitive topic and it is complicated. So your voices are all welcome. And again, I just want to thank you for everything that you've been sharing.
Going back into the chat, just to grab a question that was thrown out there earlier. Is it okay if I just put it out there, Jenny?
Please, go ahead.
This person said, I have a question about how communities like churches respond if an adult survivor comes forward publicly that they were abused by an adult in the community. What is the responsibility of the community in terms of reporting, responding, supporting, and so on?
Are you asking me?
Kind of throwing it out there.
So what is the responsibility of the church if an adult comes to the church and says that they were sexually abused as a child?
It looks like they say come forward publicly, so it doesn't specifically name that this individual was coming to the church specifically. So there's a little bit of a gray area whether they were going to the church to look for the church's response, or if they were just going to, you know, friends or maybe a family member to kind of share their experience. But it looks like maybe more than one person knows, because they're thinking about the community response of maybe how they can respond to this.
I think that all churches should respond to the fact of sexual abuse by providing more information and awareness to people about how common it is, and support to anyone that comes to them. I don't know that there's anything that could go beyond that. If it, you know, sometimes people do like call a church and say, hey, you've got somebody in your church that sexually abused me, you know, years ago or something like that. They have the right to do that, you know, and some pastors might take that, seriously and talk to that person. You know, that goes back to those questions about what do you do and who do you talk to and how do you talk to them and, you know, what do you say? I don't know. It's gonna, that all depends on who the person is, whether they're attending that church, who the perpetrator is, who the pastor is, you know, what their beliefs are. There's enough variables in there to like fill a page. So I'm not going to give an adequate answer to that question at all, I don't think. Jenny, you have a better answer?
Well, no, we did. That's actually what we were discussing just a little bit earlier about what can you do in the community and how you can begin to ask questions about how safety is practiced, how policies and procedures. You know, I also recommend that folks take a look at our website under our resource guide for safety in faith-based institutions. Although we said like churches, we're also talking about schools and we're also talking about community centers. And, you know, so I would recommend that folks look at how to have conversations, how to identify behaviors in conversation with a colleague or your child's teachers or coaches when you see warning signs, how to talk with other parents about concerns. And yes, I do think that if somebody has raised particular concerns with a particular individual, to talk to the person in charge of that program. This is what I've heard. Do you know anything more about that? Or this is what's been disclosed. Have you heard this? Has there been a response? And to take your cues often from there. Hey, Lori, good to see you out there. Lori Tajarki, I do this all the time to you, Lori, from ICMIC, the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, is also sharing that they train organizations on how to respond to anonymous reports. I highly recommend checking out their portal. They have shared that link. Micah has shared the information that we just referenced on our website. And
can I add one more piece as well?
Yeah,
Jenny?
I'm aware of time that it's 3:15.
Oh, okay. I'll just add this quickly. And if anyone needs to sign up, I'm going to pop the survey into chat really quickly. But, you know, the best case response, of course, is to you know, ask this person what they want, how they want to move forward, and to kind of put those supports in place from there. You know, do they want to take a look at if this happened in the church or the faith community? You know, can that individual, do they want to be involved in taking a look at how the abuse was allowed to occur? You know, are there additional policies that need to be put in place? Do there need to be, you know, trainings given to the church staff members? Are there things that need to be strengthened or added on? Or even, you know, do people need to be given tools about how to talk about this and respond up the chain? Because a lot of times if there is something going on, you know, just like when we don't want to believe about this happening, you know, with a close family member or a spouse or a relative, this also is true for, you know, our fellow coworkers. So how do we learn to respond to everything from minor boundary crossing behaviors all the way up to all the way up the chain to, you know, abuse? So that would be just my 2 cents on this topic.
Yeah.
Jenny, can I add one thing very, very quickly?
Yes.
Okay. One of my dreams at the time that I first, the disclosure by my child first came to me was I'm going to write a book about it, right? So a book, What Do I Do Now? A Survival Guide for Mothers of Sexually Abused Children will be released the end of this month or the 1st of February, okay? It will be available on Amazon. I had forgotten to mention that before, and that's a pretty significant thing. It's been in the works for a long time, and it's a concise guide for moms to have to address all the things they need to know as a survival guide when they first find out that their child has been abused, and that would be adult or child victim.
Great. Yes, thank you. And it's important. I'm glad you shared that. Mel, thank you so much. This has been one of the most engaging webinars we've had, actually. I think that this is obviously a topic that brings up a lot for folks. There's always questions. I you know, have gotten some comments. Thank you so much. So thank you for the time that you shared. Thank you for the work that you do. And particularly turning, you know, as you said at the very beginning, how your life experience has led your journey on what you've done. Thank you for allowing that journey then to be shared with us. And thank you all for hanging in with us out there. Thank you for the wonderful chat and the support. I've seen so much support and great information shared. That's what we need to do, is keep supporting and taking care of each other. Thank you so much, y'all. Have a really great afternoon. Don't forget to do your webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. And if we missed anyone's question, because there was such great engagement, please do just reach on out to us. Jenny, can you move to the last slide if anyone wants to take down our emails? We are sorry if we missed something in the chat, but thank you all. And thank you so much, Mel.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.